Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Now today we'll be making blackberry, or mint blackberry granita, and it's very similar to making sorbet except the way that you freeze it. So I'm going to try and go a little bit quicker through the beginning portion since I've just recently did the sorbet episode. And for those of you who haven't seen that sorbet episode, I'll go ahead and put a link to it in my blog so that you can just jump on over and see how it works. Just like sorbet, granita is basically made with some kind of fruit or wine that is sweetened with sugar syrup or simple syrup, and in the case of using wine or champagne, you might have to add a little bit of water. And the reason is that wine and sugar both inhibit the freezing process. So too much sugar and too much wine, and they won't freeze up and they won't set up, so just end up just being a really cold liquid. I mean, think about putting like a bottle of alcohol in the freezer. Sometimes champagne and wine will freeze, but a lot of times not all of it. And like I said, it inhibits it, so the more sugar is in it, the less likely it's going to freeze. Now that's usually the case with sorbet, but granita, because there's a lot less sugar in it, usually freezes up pretty well. It's actually a little bit harder to mess up granita in my opinion. And to measure the sugar density, I'm going to be using something called a bomb scale, and it's basically used to measure density of a liquid, and pastry chefs use it to measure density of a liquid when it has sugar in it. It's not a super precise science because of the way that we're using it, but it still gives us a really good idea and it helps us make everything more equal, makes our sorbets or makes our granitas more equal as we make it. Because sometimes using a cup here of sugar syrup and 2 cups of blackberry juice may not always work out the way we want it to. So by using a bomb scale, we have a better idea. Plus, it's a little bit easier, especially if you don't have a recipe for a certain flavor, to use a bomb scale to make your own recipe. Because basically all we're doing is we're landing between 10 and 12 degrees bomb. So you can use any fruit juice and just keep pouring simple syrup in until it reaches 10 to 12 degrees bomb. Or if you need to, add water so that way it goes back to zero, closer to zero. Simple syrup will lead you closer to a higher bomb, and water will lead you closer to zero. Sometimes fruit juice will too. So why don't we go ahead and get started. First of all, I already made my simple syrup on the stove. Simple syrup is just 1 pound of sugar with 1 pound of water boiled in the stove, and I added a little bit of cream of tartar as well to help prevent crystallization, as well as I boiled it with the lid for the first 3 minutes or so, because what happens is sugar syrup crystallizes because a lot of times anyway, sugar crystals will be on the side of the pot, and those sugar crystals will fall into your simple syrup and start the crystallization process. So by boiling it with a lid on first, it kind of washes down the sides. Now you can also do that by taking a pastry brush and running around the sides, but I think boiling with a lid first is a little bit easier, a little less labor intensive. Now I've also boiled my simple syrup with a few mint leaves to help infuse the flavor. Not a whole lot, because if you remember from my grasshopper cheesecake episode, or at least the blog post, if you use too much mint leaves, it kind of starts tasting like a freshly mowed lawn. So I just use about 5 or 6 mint leaves, and maybe that even might be a little bit too much, so just keep that in mind. And boiling your flavor into your simple syrup is a great way to add flavor to a lot of different things, including cakes, because a lot of times you use simple syrup to help increase the moisture content in a cake. I've also prepared my blackberries. Now I used 1 pound, 8 ounces of fresh blackberries, pureed them, and strained out all the pulp and the seeds, which ends up leaving us with about 5.5 to 6 ounces of blackberry juice. I know it's a huge difference, but those seeds are really heavy. Take solace in the fact, though, that we've got, volume-wise, a lot of the juice. Now, if you have access to a natural food store, a lot of times they'll have blackberry juice, so you can skip the step by using fresh blackberries. The reason I use fresh blackberries is because Ada, if you remember her episode, or the episode where I used her recipe to make the pecan tasties, she has blackberry bushes on her property, and every summer the blackberries ripen, and she gives us a whole bunch of blackberries. So I didn't want them to go to waste, and she had already made a cobbler, and I didn't want to make a pie since she already made a cobbler, so I decided to make blackberry granita, which is great because then I can make an episode for you guys and kind of inspire you guys to see that it's really easy to make granita, as well as let people know that granita exists, because a lot of times people just think ice cream sorbet, but there is granita, and granita is a lot easier to make because you don't need an ice cream maker. Now if you want, you can use your ice cream maker. It'll make a much smoother granita because of the constant churning. But if you want to make more of an icy granita, which is what I'm going to be doing, you want to use a shallow baking dish to freeze your granita. Now, granted, you can use metal or plastic or glass. I just prefer glass mostly because I have a lot of it, but a lot of times some people find that glass metal has some kind of reactive property. I don't know, maybe the acids in the baking dish or whatever, and it can change the taste of their acidic recipes like salsa and stuff like that. And plastic can sometimes harbor flavors. It sometimes can absorb flavors. Like if you food process fish and then you wash it out, you don't leave it dirty, but the next day it still kind of has a fishy smell to it. Plastic sometimes absorbs smell. So I like to use glass. But feel free to use whatever you'd like. It's all pretty much the same as far as I'm concerned. So now that I've gone over basically all of our ingredients, why don't we go ahead and start adding in our simple syrup to our blackberry juice. Now I have a relatively large bowl, but I want to make sure that I can put as much of the simple syrup in as I need. I might need to use a more narrow bowl because as you can see, the bomb scale is very tall and very narrow. So in order for it to read, it has to sink. So it needs to sink basically all the way up here. So it needs to be pretty full in order for it to reach that high. So I may need to switch it to a different bowl, but I just wanted to start with a larger bowl just in case, so that I didn't have to go up instead of down. So what I'm doing now is I'm straining out all the mint leaves in the simple syrup, as well as some of the crystallized sugar, because sometimes it can still crystallize a little bit. Now I've added in about 4.5 ounces of simple syrup. I'm going to have to transfer it to a skinnier container to take the bomb reading though. Alright, it looks like our bomb is still just a little too low for what we need it to be. So we're going to go ahead and add in 1.5 ounces more. So that'll take us to 6 ounces. Alright, so I'm going to show you. We're basically at where we need to be for our bomb, but I'm going to go ahead and show you what I did. So basically I had to use a more narrow container. And so I just drop it in, and it should be right beneath the thick black line. Unfortunately, I don't have a marker for 10, but the 10 is basically that thick line. So we'll drop it in. And the bomb has sank pretty much to where the black line is. Now, I would actually suggest probably landing right around 5.5 ounces of simple syrup. And just so you know, the simple syrup was boiled to 220 degrees. That's important because if you boil it past that, it's going to get a little bit thicker. So you'll actually use less simple syrup, or need less simple syrup. And if you boil it lower than 220 degrees, then you would need more because there's more water in it. So make sure you boil your simple syrup 220 degrees. Another thing you need to remember is in order to take an accurate bomb, your liquid has to be around room temperature, so about 70 degrees, somewhere between plus or minus 5 degrees, 70 degrees. And don't worry about writing everything down. I have the recipe on my website, at my website, www.theauberginechef.com. And so next, we're just going to go ahead and put everything into the baking dish. Give it a good stir. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put this in the freezer, and we're going to freeze it for approximately 4 hours. But between every 45 minutes to an hour, we're going to take a fork and we're going to stir it up. The first couple hours, we may not see a whole lot of change, but later on, as we get closer to 4 hours, we should start seeing it turning into ice. And by the fourth or fifth time we stir it with a fork, it should be pretty much ready to eat. Otherwise, it might take up to 6 hours. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and I'll show you every step of the way how it looks as it's developing. Alright, so it's been about 45 minutes to an hour. This is our first hour, basically. Go ahead and mix it all up. Use a fork or a whisk. And we're basically just creating air crystals and kind of mixing it up. This helps develop the unique texture that's found in Granita. Remember, you can use an ice cream mixer, just be aware that it's going to create a more fine texture, more like sorbet than Granita. But But like I said, I mean, without an ice cream maker, you still can make this. So this is a great way to still enjoy an iced dessert, even if you don't have access to an ice cream maker. And you can pretty much do ice cream this way too. It's not as light and airy as your ice cream will be if you made an ice cream maker, but it's still possible. Alright, once your ice crystals are all dispersed throughout, go ahead and wrap it back up and put it back in the freezer for another 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Alright, so we're at hour 2. Go ahead and mix it up. The edges are setting up a little bit faster than the inside is. It's already forming that characteristic grainy texture that is Granita is well known for. Alright, so we're at hour 3. As you can see, it's getting almost like ice, I don't want to say snow cone texture because it's not quite as grainy as that, but it's definitely developing a grainier texture than a regular sorbet. Alright, so this is the 4th hour for stirring up our Granita, and it's pretty much ready to go. You can serve it immediately, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it freeze overnight and let it sit up, get nice and firm, so that way I can plate it up a little bit nicer. And you can also continue stirring it for another couple more hours if you'd like to continue to develop the texture, but it's pretty much ready to serve, so give it a nice time overnight to sit up, and then it'll be nice and firm. Okay, here is our finished blackberry granita, or our mint blackberry granita. I went ahead and garnished it with a little bit of a mint leaf to give it a nice contrast. As you can see, it's got a little bit more of a grainy texture compared to a sorbet, but it's still nice and soft, so that way it's not rock hard when you're taking it out of the freezer, so you can still eat it right away. And if you want to, you can adjust the sugar up or down. I would say you probably want to go down to get a more icy texture. If you go up, it'll be more like sorbet, and it'll actually probably even be softer. So if you want to adjust the texture, try heading in the opposite direction, making it adding less sugar, less simple syrup, and you'll get a much more icy texture as well. Alright, so that's how you make blackberry granita. Now I hope I showed you a way to make frozen desserts without a mixer or an ice cream maker or a sorbet maker, so that way you know that it's not completely impossible to make a really good frozen dessert for your friends or for your dinner party, even without the equipment, without the special equipment. So I hope you learned a lot today. Thanks for watching, and remember, the Aubergine Chef, demystifying dessert, one recipe at a time.